Okay, then welcome everybody. Welcome to the journalists and guests. My name is Fabio De Masi, member for the GUE and for the German left in the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs, and shadow for the Juncker plan, for the EFSI proposal. And my co-shadow is here to the left from the Budget Committee, Leonie Riada, an Irish colleague from Sinn Féin, Marisa Mateus, our coordinator in the Econ Committee from Portugal, from Bloco de Esquerda, and our guest, Stuart Holland, former advisor to Mr. Wilson and Jacques Delors, a former Labour MP from the United Kingdom, and well known for his modest proposal, which he developed together with the now Greek Minister of Finance, Yanis Varoufakis, and with the equally famous Galbraith. Yeah. Galbraith, the son of the famous Galbraith who once advised Mr. Kennedy. And I will start the press conference just by shortly introducing what's GUE's take on the Juncker plan, and then I will pass on to my guest, and then my other colleagues will join me for further comments. First of all, GUE NGL has now for many years criticized austerity, and there's one simple truth in Europe: austerity has killed investment, and if you want to revive investment and growth in Europe, you have to kill austerity. Simple as that. You can see it in the data, and for one very straightforward reason: if you cut back on wages, on pensions, on state expenditure, even private business will not anymore invest, because it's not reasonable to do so if there is a lack of demand in the economy. So we certainly are strictly opposed to the failed austerity policies across Europe. We have seen that even nearly zero low interest rates don't induce private business to invest for that simple reason. And hence we certainly welcome any initiative which is intended to bring back investment and jobs and growth to the European economy, but we are highly skeptical that the Juncker plan will do so for one simple reason. The Juncker plan is basically an embarrassment as far as it stands, because Juncker didn't know where to get the money from the member states. So he said, you know, like the big banks, the big insurers have a problem. We have low interest rates, they don't have profitable investment, so let's provide them with our infrastructure, let's erect public guarantees, so taxpayers will guarantee private investments. And we have plenty of experience with these so-called public-private partnerships, and they're usually even dearer for the taxpayers. So it's a little bit of a contradiction to argue that you member states don't have money to invest, but we make it dearer for the taxpayer. Why is it dearer? Because the taxpayer also has to satisfy the profits of those big insurance funds and corporations. When, for example, the German Allianz is now planning to invest in motorways, they will certainly charge their return on investment to the taxpayers. Hence, GUE has always argued for a genuine public investment program with democratic control, something my colleague will still expand on, I believe. And we have said that there's no problem in financing such investment program, not at all. First of all, because of the European Investment Bank being able to issue bonds, something Stuart will still elaborate on. Second of all, because ECB has now financed financial markets and banks. They pumped billions of it into the financial system, yes, leading to new asset price bubbles, but banks don't lend to business because there is no investment demand, and they could equally guarantee these bonds or directly finance public investment. Secondly, because there's plenty of liquidity and wealth. The wealth, even in countries such as Greece, has even increased for the upper upper classes of the income distribution. So now we're talking about LuxLeaks and tax havens. So there's certainly a lot of improvement that can be done in terms of tax revenue and other issues. And thirdly, because most studies, even the IMF, have now found that spending now into the economy, investing, largely finances itself by higher growth and then more tax collection, up to a factor of 1.6. So if you spend €1, you get €1.60 in return because you kickstart growth. But apparently the EU Commission is not prepared to do so. And we have a very awkward design of the whole thing. We have the Stability and Growth Pact. When you do an investment which also creates wealth for future generations, this is counted as debt during under the Stability and Growth Pact. But if you chip in money to guarantee private investments, it's not counted as debt. So we see it's a pure political decision. And here I will stop. And I just want to make aware that we have also distributed here a short version of our positions that you may take home and read. It's worthwhile. You will also find some of the alternatives by Stuart Holland there. We have had a longer version, also in collaboration with Paloma Lopez and Miguel Vegas, two other colleagues, that you may also take with you if you're interested. And you will present your book and everything else yourself, I guess.
Okay.
Stuart Holland.
Well, thank you very much. I want to make 4 or 5 points on the proposal for the so-called European Fund for Strategic Investment. First, it was proposed by Mateusz Tezurek, who's a very brilliant finance minister of Poland, but as a bond-funded recovery scheme, as was the original Juncker proposal. On July the 15th, on his adoption in the European Parliament, he actually said it should be, when he talked of 300 billions, it should be EIB bond funded. What we've now got is a fantasy. It's a public-private partnership with no public money. Its expected leverage of 15, even Jyrki Katainen, in whose name it was recycled, said this is exaggerated. To take the, it's not going to be a workshop for recovery, it's going to be a talk shop. It's going to take 6 months for 6 people part-time to decide on what Europe should invest, which, as Philippe Maystadt said in December and again in another meeting here last month, is absurd. 6 people part-time. The European Investment Bank Group has hundreds of people working full-time on investment evaluation, and they know how to evaluate them, whereas the part-timers do not. It's a misperception, nonetheless, this new fund of Mateusz Tezurek, brilliant though he is, because either he or one of his aides looked at a website reference to the fund that I happened to design for Jacques Delors, which is called the European Investment Fund, which had the same strategic objectives, which Delors got set up in 1999, which Mateusz argued in a Brussels Bruegel speech in September that the EIF, European Investment Fund, could not do this strategic recovery job. But it's a misperception, because its first article says the task of the fund shall be to contribute to the pursuit of community objectives. These can be defined by the European Council. Recovery is certainly a European objective. And secondly, that the fund may include borrowing operations, in other words, issue bonds. And at a meeting in December at the European Policy Centre, an economic advisor to Katainen actually admitted, after I stressed this point, that the EIF could issue bonds instead of promises and guarantees and could start business now. So why a European Investment Fund and the European Investment Bank? Essentially because the European Investment Bank is very dependent on pension funds, and it needs a very high credit rating. But the original aim of my design of the European Investment Fund for Delors was that it should recycle global surpluses. And on September the 25th in Washington, the BRICS said that if there were to be an investment recovery program, they would invest in bonds or Eurobonds or EIF bonds for this. The other point on multipliers and another point on criteria is that you don't need to invent the criteria. Memories are short, or in Kleinian terms, you've got displacement and denial, because the Amsterdam Special Action Programme, of which it appears none of the senior advisors have yet heard, in 1997, agreed with the European Investment Bank that it should invest in health, education, urban renewal, the environment, green technologies, as well as small and medium firms. Criteria don't need to be invented. And behind this, of course, we need a narrative. We need a political narrative. We don't need just new financial instruments. We need a new deal for Europe, which, on the lines of the US New Deal, is how I sold the case to Delors in 1993, which resulted in the European Investment Fund being set up. It's there. We don't need new institutions. We don't need new criteria. Recovery could start from now. Thank you.
So thank you, Stuart. I pass on to my colleague, Leah will do the, she will finish the job.
Okay. That sounds ominous. Okay, thank you. I'm going to speak in Portuguese. Don't you want to put Fabio is in denial state now. Boa tarde a todos e a todas.
Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you very much for your presence here today. This conference that we're organising is very important. And it's not only because we're interested in investment, as Fabio said, and as Stuart Holland has also told us, but it's also because we want to debate this investment plan presented by Mr. Juncker. We want to debate the key issues that lie behind this new initiative, which I think are counterproductive, in fact, compared to what we actually need for the European Union. Well, as Fabio said, we have a document which he is the main brain behind. We're presenting an alternative strategic investment fund where we point out the sectors and areas where we need to invest so that we can genuinely lead to a recovery in the European economy, which is something that which we've not achieved to date. But look at some of the options that are being taken in the European Union. It seems that they're choosing not to pursue public investment. The Juncker plan is nothing but a collection of public-private partnerships. But all of the guarantees that lie behind it is public. So it's all public collateral. Public investment, genuine public investment, is completely outside this plan. And this is something that you find running through all of the texts that have been presented to us in the area of economic policy, investment policy at the European level. The other option that's been taken is the strategic sectors that they're choosing for investment. Well, Stuart Holland already said a few words about this, so I won't go on at length. But if you look at all of the documents that we've received from the Commission, there's a new magic word, which is innovation. All of the new investments have to be innovative. They have to be dedicated to something that they can't define, but there's something extraordinary there. that they're trying to get hold of. But the problem is we don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's why we have to ask why they are choosing not to invest in strategic sectors for the development of the European economy. Areas like health and education, sectors that Stuart Holland already mentioned. I could also mention that they now have invented the concept of flexibilization. Well, for years now, we've been saying that you shouldn't simply calculate deficits and include the investment in calculations for deficit. The countries that most need the investment seem to be forgotten about. They are the ones that are in most trouble. They can't get the flexibility mechanism. They can't count on the idea that their investments won't be included in deficit calculations. So that's an important factor. Now, this conference is focused on the Juncker plan, but we've also connected that to public-private partnerships. There's a reason for that. When you've got a public-private partnership with a public guarantee behind it, then you find that they simply soak up public money. And this is particularly the case in the countries on the periphery of the Eurozone. We know already the results of the budget in Portugal. The expenditure of the Portuguese state on public-private partnerships and debt interest are absolutely identical to the total public sector wage bill. So public-private partnerships are simply soaking up public money. The same applies to debt, of course, particularly in the countries that are subject to intervention programs. But it's soaking up all of the money that we're getting in from tax revenues. This is a key factor that we need to bear in mind in the debates that we have ahead of us.
So I pass on to my co-shadow from the Budget Committee, Leah.
Gurmagad, Fabio. Well, look, just to echo what has been said, I think we're all completely in agreement that the Juncker plan just comes with a massive health warning. It's toxic. And as Stuart has already stated there, we already have a fund in place. So it's ludicrous to be dressing this up to be something that is completely new, because it isn't. And also, as Fabio mentioned earlier on, the whole lack of democratic accountability is quite alarming. They're selling this as something that's going to save Europe. And it's very hard for, I suppose, our grouping, which is in the minority, to kind of say to the people, look, we are not against investment. We really are looking for investment, but this is not smart investment. This is going to be the public taxpayer at the end of the day helping to create this horrendous financial bubble, which the taxpayer is going to be footing the bill in a few years down the road when it all goes belly up. So I think we have to look at it more holistically and not just isolate the Juncker plan on its own. I think we have to look at the whole monetary union and how we're going to approach it. And you have to take into consideration things like quantitative easing. You have to take all other aspects of the budget into consideration and not just isolate one thing. There's a synergy there. They're all kind of collaborated in one sense. And at the root of it all is democratic accountability. Because, for instance, we know that the EIB currently have 3 or 4 projects rolled out. And that's kind of more or less saying to us, well, look, it's a fait accompli. The Juncker plan is being rolled out, even though it hasn't been voted on. So we are kind of powerless in this. So we're kind of in a sticky situation in that sense that, you know, it's going ahead whether we like it or not. And I think we have to be very careful that the people at home, whichever home you're in, are aware that of the effects that it's going to have on them, and particularly when it comes to public investment. And say, for instance, in Ireland, with the water situation that we have massive protests that people don't want to pay for water. And if those people realise that that's going to be private investment and that, you know, eventually the ESFI is going to be accommodating that, and so they're going to be paying some, you know, neoliberal financing, whatever conglomeration that's going to own it eventually, it's even going to make them angrier. But I don't think people are aware of it. There's a huge amount of ignorance out there as to what it is, because it's presented in this wonderful spin of, oh, well, we're trying to increase growth and jobs and boost the economy. And so it puts us at a very kind of cynical level. You know, it makes us look like the bad guys, that we're against investment. So I think we really have to come up with that alternative of saying, look, smart investment is what it's needed. And even, again, making the people at home aware of the lack of accountability with the steering board that they have, with the way that the people are chosen on that, with how they're going to present it to the Parliament, who gets to choose the projects, is it going to be based on different countries' contributions, you know, the disparity between the richer countries versus the poorer ones. We see already that the gap between rich and poor is just widening at an alarming rate. So all those things have to be taken into consideration, and I think as a political grouping ourselves and individually as politicians, we have a responsibility to make the public aware of just how bad this bloody plan is. And it's how we approach that, again, as I'm saying, holistically, that we need to have an overall view of how we should be moving in the European Union regarding our budgets. So I look forward to hearing the views of other people on this. And also one other interesting thing, I'm not sure whether it has been discussed much, and I only thought of it myself today, really. Have we had analysis from private investors themselves, who are going to be the key stakeholders? They're the ones that are going to be making the money and the profit out of it. And it'll be interesting to hear what their take and what their analysis of the whole plan is, because they are the key stakeholders. And what is going to attract them to invest in the first place, particularly when you consider the economic climate that we're in. And sure, they're all shifting over to Asia. They have no more interest in investing in euro than you know, whatever. So anyway, that's my bit. And I'm very glad that we're holding this conference. And I'd like to thank Fabio for all his input, and Stuart and Marisa. So Sinead.
In 30 seconds, 2 points following that. People don't recognise that the European Investment Bank and the European Investment Fund are non-profit. They're non-profit. And their investments are public investments in health, education, urban regeneration, etc., which does generate income for the private sector. And what we need here is investment push, not private sector expectations of recovery. And the further point is, the Court of Auditors has challenged this whole proposal, and the Parliament quite rightly has said it's simply reshuffling research budgets. It really is a scandal. It's an outright scandal, and it's a deceit of the public to imagine, as has been argued, that this can assure a European recovery. Private sector can't do it. This is a need for a public sector investment push. And further point, European Investment Bank borrowing does not count on national debt. At a very high-level conference in December, with the senior economic advisors to the most senior commissioners, I was getting exasperated about how do we accommodate the private sector, and I said, put up your hands. Those of you who know, European Investment Bank borrowing does not count on national debt, therefore it doesn't count under Maastricht. Not one knew. Not one. There is ignorance. In the German case, we have arrogance. Tragically, in the Commission, we have ignorance. And that needs to be challenged.
Yeah, it's true. I'm sorry, I'll just come in on that. I think you're absolutely right. There's an incredible amount of ignorance there. And I just want 2 more further points before I'll certainly finish up, because I think it's important to mention it, is the whole idea of the structural funds as well being used as a kind of a carrot for the countries, that they can, you know, use that for the private investors to invest. So again, coming back to the Irish water situation, for instance, structural funds that could be used for shoring up Irish water can now be used to attract the investor, and it's just horrendous. And also the member state countries then won't have as much to pay into the budget, because they'll take it out of the structural funds. So it reduces what their net contribution is. So all those facts, people kind of switch off when they hear numbers and they hear this thing about this fund and that fund. But when you relate it down to the end of the day, you're getting a bill in the door, you're going to be paying 200 or 300 euros a month, and it's going directly into some private guy who owns all of Irish water. Yes. That's what they relate to, nothing else. Yes. And that's the harsh reality of it. But ignorance, as you say, is bliss, and the Commission seems to be incredibly ignorant about it. So that's it.
Okay.
So thanks very much, everyone, but I still want to give the present journalists at least the possibility to raise some questions if they wish to do so.
Anyone?
Hi, Craig Willey, German Press Agency. I mean, so how much public money would you like to see invested? I mean, because at the end of the day, taxpayers would be liable and there would be debt somewhere, whether you count it into the national budgets or whether you count it under Maastricht is another question. But how much would you like to see invested? Thank you.
It's not taxpayers' money. It's not taxpayers' money. It's bond investors' money. It's pension fund money and sovereign wealth funds. This is one of the fundamental errors in perception, that Germany is paymaster, Germany must pay, Germany must guarantee. It doesn't have to do any of these things, which is one reason the European Investment Bank was designed in 1958. But let's by all means talk about this more if you wish, and if you can't, take that at face value.
I just would like to add that most economists believe that to have a reasonable impact, you need at least an investment stimulus of 2% of GDP a year. We believe it is not just a program to flatten the business cycle. We have a true investment gap accumulated over years and years, so we believe it must go at least over 10 years. And we have so far said that we would, our own calculations suggest that we would need something along the lines of 2 to 5% of GDP yearly, which would be roughly 260 to 500 billion a year, which is what the ECB is projecting at as well. So they have the liquidity to finance the banks. Secondly, there's a huge, as I already said, self-financing component. So if you spend €1 and you kickstart the economy, which private investors are unable to do in such a climate, it's only the state who can solve the collective action problem currently, then you will even have higher returns. A lot of studies, even the IMF, has shown that. So we think, and you can see that in the data, austerity has not contributed to reducing debts. You can see in Greece, harsh austerity, harsh cutbacks, GDP has climbed from debt to GDP from 120% of GDP to over 170%. So we think it's even cheaper in the end to invest. Any business which would not anymore invest will go bankrupt over the long run, and that's even true for the European economy. Okay, our press official tells me we have to stop here.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, yes. Thanks. And we'll continue with our hearing with additional experts, with José Antonio García Cebrián, ex-Deputy Minister of Public Works and Housing in the Regional Government of Andalusia, Ricardo Cabral, Professor at the University of Madeira, and Javier Sol from Counterbalance, an organization which looks critically at the work of investment banks and how to improve their public and democratic accountability. Thank you very much.